our Facebook page afterwards. I know there were a lot of you that couldn't make it today, so we wanted to make sure we give you an opportunity to listen later. Good evening, and thank you everyone for joining me today on the last PDAC meeting of this school year. This, as we all know, has been quite a trying year. We've been remote for a majority of the year. Our PDAC meetings have grown, sometimes twice the number of people, sometimes 3 or 4 times the number of people. And that is, I guess, the little bit of the silver lining of having Zoom, is that everyone can join or listen in later. My name is Saili Joshi, and I am the chair of the Parent Diversity Advisory Council for District 204. This is my last meeting as a parent in the district, as my youngest one is graduating in May, and it's been such an honor for me to be the chair of this organization for the past 7 years and to lead courageous conversations with our community. I look forward to supporting the work of PDAC as a community member and providing support to my amazing leadership team, which many of you know. For those who are new to PDAC, I want to welcome you and invite you to attend our future meetings. And I wanted to give you a brief introduction of PDAC and our mission. So we always start with our PDAC promise. And our promise is to engage in active conversation concerning issues that are important to you. We promise to stand alongside you when you need an advocate. We promise to work with the district to ensure all families and students in our community feel welcomed in their respective school building and in their classrooms. We promise to continue to bring awareness to the meaning of equity and our mission statement, and most importantly, we promise to advance District 204's commitment to equity and educational excellence always. Next slide, please. As you know, we're going to be discussing the book Stamped, and we have some wonderful guest authors here today for our meeting. But I also wanted to let you know that you can purchase the book at Anderson's Bookstore, and our Naperville Public Library has made sure that there are plenty of digital as well as hardback and paperback copies of this book available for you. So please do, if you haven't had a chance to read the book, please pick it up for summer reading. Next slide. Our 2 guests today are Jason Reynolds and Dr. Cherry Paul will be here today. I'm not going to do a long introduction of them. We are so honored to have them here. There was a conflict at the last minute for Dr. Kendi, so he will not be able to join us, but we hope to have him in the future at District 204 again. The introductions of these authors will be done in just a few minutes by our students. Next slide. And just quickly, how to stay in touch with PDAC. We have a Facebook page where we're constantly posting things. We are on Twitter, and we're also a sub-page on our IPSD website. Wonderful. And I wanted to take a moment to also thank our partners tonight. Naperville Neighbors United and Councilman Benny White, who started NNU to hold these similar conversations at a city level. He is actually boarding a flight right now as we're speaking, so he wasn't able to speak tonight, but I do hope that you take the time to join an NNU meeting in the future. I would also like to thank Jen Rowe, Mary Yockey, and the rest of Jen's team for facilitating the student and teacher portion of tonight's webinar. And in addition, I'd like to thank Pages, Paces, and PASS, our African American parent groups, for partnering with us. And at this time, I would like to invite the executive director of our Naperville Public Library, my friend Dave Della Terza, to say a few words and tell you about the exciting programs they have this summer for all of you. They have been a wonderful partner for us by providing access to digital as well as printed books to our community for all of our books that we've been reading over the past few years. Dave, please welcome me to PDAC.
So I'm really excited for today's event, and I just wanted to talk a little bit about Naperville Public Library and what we've been doing around diversity, equity, inclusion. And while we do a lot of the same stuff that PDAC does, and we love working with PDAC, we're really excited about what you guys are doing. And like Siley said, we've got additional copies of all 3 stamp books, and I checked right before this program, and we have both Stamp from the Beginning and Stamp the Young Adult adaptation available at the library today if you want a copy. So feel free to put them on hold. And Stamp for Kids just came out, and we've got that on its way to the shelves right now. We also started a diversity team back in 2016, but we've recently adapted that to become a diversity, equity, inclusion team in 2020. And our current committee consists of 7 staff members across the organization, and we're looking for ways to make sure we're taking DEI into account at all of the work we do at the library. We've got some things like the Sensory NPL app to make the library more accessible to people with autism spectrum disorder and other sensory disabilities. We also have a world language collection with 9 languages in it right now. Arabic, Chinese, French, Hindi, Marathi, Polish, Russian, Spanish, and Tamil. And we are just about to add our 10th language, Urdu, in 2022. And then beyond our print books, we also have ebooks, newspapers, magazines, and movies in 60 languages. We also have collections in many different formats. And we're doing our DEI audits right now to see how diverse our collections are and our programs are, and then making recommendations on what we can do to improve. So for instance, we're making sure any book displays we do are going to have at least 20% titles from diverse authors or feature diverse characters. We also provide services like home delivery to assisted living centers and people that can't get to the library. And we are also creating reading recommendation lists. And this year for 2021, we're focusing on DEI, and we're highlighting a different DEI topic every single month. So we've got lists around anti-racism, women's history, LGBTQ history, and more. So if there's anything that we can do at the library to help you out, or if there's anything that we don't have at the library, please let me know. My daughter clearly wants some attention right now. But thank you guys for having us as a part of this event. And if there's anything that we can do to, like I said, if there's anything that we can do better, if there's anything that we could do at the library to help advance diversity, equity, and inclusion in our community, please let us know.
Thank you so much, Dave. There is a reason why you get elected the #1 public library in the country all the time, and very well deserved. But thank you for being such a great partner. Now it is my great pleasure tonight to welcome Jason Reynolds and Dr. Sonia Cherry-Paul as our guests to discuss Stamped. We chose this book because we realized we needed to understand our collective history. So many of the issues that we face as a country, or even as a community, stem from not taking the time to understand each other and the lived experiences of our neighbors. This was our effort in starting a courageous conversation between all of us so that we can be better allies to each other. It is a true bonus to have chosen a book that has an adult version and a YA version, and I'm now even more thrilled that we will have an elementary version of Stamped. Please take the time to read this book as a family and have these discussions with your children. I am always amazed, as we will see tonight, how intelligent and thoughtful our students are about learning about new ideas that will open their minds to new thoughts as they become young adults. And with that, I would like to introduce a few of our students tonight. And I will start with the Metea graduating senior, Mahanur Mortaza, who will introduce Dr. Kendi's bio, even though he will not be here today.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. Dr. Ibram Kendi is one of America's foremost historians and leading anti-racist scholars. He's a National Book Award winning and #1 New York Times bestselling author of 7 books. He is the Andrew W. Mellon Professor in the Humanities and the founding director of the Boston University Center for Anti-Racist Research. He is also the 2020-2021 Francis B. Cashin Fellow at the Radcliffe Institute for the Advanced Study at Harvard University. He's a contributor writer at The Atlantic and a CBS News racial justice contributor. He is the host, Be Anti-Racist with Ibram Kendi, a new podcast he's launching on June 9th with Pushkin Industries and iHeartMedia. In 2020, Time Magazine named him one of the 100 most influential people in the world. Dr. Kendi is the author of The Black Campus Movement, which won the W.E.B. Du Bois Book Prize, and Stamped from the Beginning, The Definitive History of Racist Ideas in America, which won the National Book Award for Nonfiction in 2016. Thank you.
Thank you, Manor, and good luck next year as you graduate and move on. Now I would like to welcome Robert, who is a Matia sophomore, to introduce Jason.
Thank you. Jason Reynolds is the #1 New York Times bestselling author of many books for kids, including When I Was the Greatest, All American Boys, which was co-written with Brandon Keeley, Long Way Down, and more. He is a 2-time National Book Award finalist, the recipient of the Newbery Honor, a Prince Honor, and multiple Coretta Scott King honors, and a winner of the Kirkus Prize, 2 Walter Dean Myers Awards, and the NAACP Image Award, among others. He lives in Washington, D.C., and is currently the National Ambassador for the Young People's Literature as designated by the Library of Congress.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Robert. And the last student, I would like to introduce Kiran Prakash, who will introduce Sonia. And for the last time, I can say go, go Mustangs. So go ahead.
Thank you. Dr. Cherry Paul is an educator, author, and the co-founder of the Institute for Racial Equity in Literacy. She's the Director of Diversity and Equity at the Teachers College Reading and Writing Project at Columbia University. As a former middle school English teacher, Sonia developed curriculum that centered the work of racial literacy in K-12 schools. She leads presentations at educational conferences and works with educators all around the world, providing professional development on anti-racist reading and writing instruction.
Thank you, Kiran. And now I would like to invite Jason to speak to us for a little bit to explain about his book, what it meant to him, before we go into some questions, your thoughts and whatever you'd like to share with us, Jason.
Oh, I appreciate everybody for coming out. Thank you, Robert. Hey, man, nailed it. You know what I mean? It's always embarrassing to hear all of that just because, you know, I'm my mama's son. That's enough. You know what I mean? Here's the thing. I just want to say something really quickly to get to it, and then we can get about it. Oh, hi, Jessica. Long time no see, homie. Good to see you too. And then we'll get out of there. The most important part of Stamped, of Stamped the Remix, is chapter 1. To me, the entire book, the most important part of the whole book is in the first 3 pages. And what I'm talking about is the idea that there was a man in Portugal in the 1400s, this guy, Gomes de Zurara, right? And that he wasn't actually a slaver. He wasn't a killer. He wasn't a thief. He was the man beside the man. And his job, he was hired by basically the Portuguese royalty to be with the soldiers, be with the conquerors, be with the slavers, the people who were the people who were stealing from North Africa, who were capturing and enslaving people so that they can get more access to the gold and so forth and so on. His job was to basically figure out a narrative to set Portugal apart from the rest of Europe, right? This is important. At the time, to give context, at the time, Europe, as all of us know, was conquering the world, right? At this point, all of us should know that Europe was conquering the world, right? Little teeny continent taking over everybody's world, right? Like everybody's land, everybody's resources. It's important that we're very frank about what was happening, right? Like that's what was going down, right? These little teeny places, like, hey, we're gonna take Africa, like we're gonna take as much of Africa as we can get at least, and you know, we can't get Ethiopia, but the rest of it, we're gonna try to see what we could do. We're gonna take South America, right? We're gonna try to conquer as much of them. Right, and they're just sort of doing their thing, and because conquering and war was a normal part of life, enslaving people was also a normal part of life. Even Europeans enslaving other Europeans if your land was being conquered. And with the Portuguese, this guy de Zurara, his whole thing was like, yo, how can we be seen not like brutalizers, but as benevolent people, right? How can we sort of shift the narrative, right? And so all he did was create a new one. This is super important. All he did was create a new narrative. He basically was like, hey, what we doing is not savagery, it's salvation. That's it. What we're doing is we're not killing people or we're not enslaving people. We're saving their souls and giving them civility. Without us, they are not whole humans. But with us, perhaps we can make them whole. Now, of course, we know this is not true. Of course, we know that he knew that this was not true, right? They were trying to get gold. He knew that, but he also understood how to set Portugal apart from the rest of their oppressive counterparts, right? Why is this important? Because his narrative, that one thing, that one story, that narrative would then spin all around, it would grow legs, and it would become the narrative that the rest of Europe would use. And then over time, it would make itself across the Atlantic Ocean and touch the shores of the Caribbean, South America, and North America, South and Central and North America, which is important that we include all of that. But in North America, it would sort of like really sort of spin on its own axis and basically create a system that we're still actually living in, right? The narrative, the systems would be attached to that narrative, and then that system would then spin on its own thing, orbit on its own, and this is where we are today. It's the same narrative that basically says we will enslave people because they need us for salvation. Then it says we will police their communities heavier because they don't know how to act in their communities. Of course, we know that's not true, right? But it's the same narrative. We will imprison them differently because they need prison in order to save themselves. Not true, right? We would like this. It's the same narrative over and over again. We will discipline Black kids in school differently because they need it, because they come from spaces where they need to be made whole. Not true, right? All of this is it's the same narrative that dates all the way back to the 1400s. Why is this important to you? Because basically what it proves is that all of this stems from somebody's imagination. Right? All of it. We're talking about 400 years of oppression from the figment of somebody's imagination and that person's ability to understand the power of language. So all I wanted to do with Stamped, and all I want to do in general with my life, is to figure out how to give young people language, how to help young people see that your imagination, this is the proof that your imagination is the most powerful tool. It's the most expensive thing you will ever own, right? And that your ability to understand and wield language could very well be path to freedom. Systems have to be attached to that language, of course, but the language is always where it starts. Ain't nothing real without words. We give words to things to make them tangible. It's the way we do it. It's the way it works. Right? No matter what your spiritual systems are or whatever you believe in, which I know we can't talk about because of school, but whatever your sort of spiritual, if you got any religious stuff, whatever it is, whatever you believe in, got a name. You know why? Because it's hard to believe in it if you don't. It makes it real, right? And so if we think about that in terms of racism and anti-racism, then we understand why these conversations and why you all having this language is so important as you all sort of grow up and change the world and save the rest of us. Right. And I think for me, along with all the information and all the history, for me, that's the one thing I want you all to take more than anything. Imagination and language. Don't play with it. Imagination and language will always be our saving grace. Mm-hmm. That's it.
Thank you, Jason. Those are profound words. I think, we could talk with you for days. So absolutely, absolutely true. So next, I would like to bring Sonia Cherry Paul to talk a little bit about her brand new book. Welcome.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the lovely introduction. Thank you for inviting me. And yeah, as you can all see, one of my jobs in adapting Stamped for Kids, the most important job to me was to preserve Jason's and Ibram's genius for a younger audience. And that was an incredibly beautiful challenge. And so for me, I just thought about two important things that I thought would be that I knew were important to all of us, and that is affirmation and awareness. That Blackness, even and especially in a book that traces the history of racism in the United States, would be affirmed, that children would see Blackness affirmed, and all children need to see Blackness affirmed. And awareness that, you know, this history would not be watered down or whitewashed for young readers. So those were two important things that I held on to while I was adapting Stamped. So that the history would be preserved, that it would not be watered down, and instead, young readers would be able to access information about people and events that are essential to understanding everything that Jason just said and everything that has led us to this very moment in our country. Because with this information and understanding, then young people can make choices, anti-racist choices that can transform their lives and the world. So really, I just read Jason's masterpiece and tried to think about what might be tricky for younger readers and to lift any barriers that might get in the way of them moving through this history. Because while this might be the first time for many young readers learning this history, it should not be the last time that they are reading about race and racism and anti-racism.
Thank you, Sonia. As I mentioned to both of you, I really thank both of you for giving us some tools. You know, it is so important for us as parents. We're responsible for these young children, these, you know, middle schoolers, these high schoolers as parents, and we want them to try to understand the world. And what you've given us is a great gift to use in our homes, in our schools, in our communities, to have these courageous conversations. So thank you so much. Next, I would like to invite Jessica Walsh, who is an instructional specialist at our district office, and she will be introducing our student panelists who have wonderful questions for all of you. Welcome, Jessica.
Thank you, Siley. Hi, Jason. Hi, Cherry. It's so good to see you, or Sonia, it's so good to see you both. Oh my goodness. I think one of the greatest gifts is being able to see both of you speak at conferences and auditoriums, but I think the greater gift is to look back to see the students' faces, the young people's faces when they are listening to your words. I know we're virtual now, but if we've ever been, you know, in an auditorium together, to look back at their faces watching you is the greatest gift as a teacher. So we want to pull up some students who have some questions for you. The Stamped books have found their way into their lives, whether it's through book clubs or in the library or from a teacher. And so I want to start with Zoe Williams. Zoe is joining us from Matia Valley High School, one of our district high schools. So Zoe, why don't you go ahead and start us off with the student panel.
How can the Black community move past accepting representation as liberation?
Shout out to Zoe said, hey, look, we're gonna start off with the hardest question first. Let's get to it. Yeah. Dr. Cherry, you want to answer that? Dr. Cherry.
How can the Black community move beyond representation as liberation? Well, this is a hard question. And I have to tell you, Zoe, I work with educators every day. Tomorrow I'll be in a school, and inevitably I'll have to say to teachers, they're predominantly white teachers, however, that having diverse books is not being anti-racist. And while representation is important and it matters tremendously, we need to be thinking about our actions. Anti-racism is not just in your mission statement, it's in your actions. It's in, and just really scrutinizing everything that a school does. So your question is about the Black community moving beyond representation. I think, you know, for many Black people, for many people of color, it is still, it still matters so greatly to see oneself reflected in the world, right? Anytime it's the first Black person to do whatever it is, it's because there's too few opportunities and too few of us being able to access whatever that thing is. So it still is a big deal for us. I'm not sure what to say about how to help Black people move beyond representation to liberation.
Tough one.
You know, you jump in, Jason. I'm thinking.
Here's what I think. It's such a good question, Zoe, and
Yeah, it really is.
appreciate you asking, because this is a question that I wish more people would actually ask, to be honest with you. First, let me set the tone and say, listen, y'all, we're gonna have a real serious conversation. I'm not a serious dude though, so like, if it gets a little silly for me, it's just because it's who I am. Don't take it personal. I'm a Black person. This is how I survive, right? Like in the world, is through humor, right? And making things all right for myself. But here's the answer to your question. At least what I think about all the time. We've already done it in the past, and I think what we should probably be doing right now is look back to see how it's worked, right? And here's what I mean. Let's use an example that we all that's on the top of our minds already, right? George Floyd. All right. George Floyd, and every time somebody is brutalized by a police officer or murdered by a police officer, right? What we do is, because of the pain, because of the disappointment of it all, because of the normalcy of it all, we take the fallen person, the deceased, the murdered person, and we symbolize them, and then we rally behind them as a symbol, right? Right? They become representation for our anger. They become representation for a momentary movement. They become representation for protest, right? We all know that this is how it happens, right? Now, if we go back, right, we all talk about Dr. King, we talk about Rosa Parks, you've been learning this in February since you was in kindergarten, right? If we go back and really look at what was happening back then, Rosa Parks sits on the bus, she gets in trouble for it. What they don't do in this moment is fight for justice for Rosa Parks. What they do is fight for collective justice. They resist the urge. Rosa was also in on the plan, right? But they resist the urge to use Rosa as representation to drive a movement. And instead what they say is, it's not about Rosa, it's a collective thing that we need to figure out. And therefore we have to move collectively for actual change. It can't be me fighting for a single person, it's me fighting for all of us, even if that means I can't use that person as the representation to push the movement. And I think this is where we're falling short. And it's tough to talk about these things, especially in mixed company, because I think at the end of the day, this is what people are used to now, right? It's like, yo, we protest. But the truth is, Zoe, there's actually no direct action in protest in the way that we're doing it. It's true. It's complicated, right? But there's no actual direct action. Marching down the street is a powerful form of representation. It's not direct action. 1960s, they was walking in the restaurants and sitting at the counter. I'm gonna force your hand. 1960s, they was walking in the schools. I'm gonna force your hand. They were saying, I'm not gonna ride the bus. I'm gonna force your hand. That's direct action. That leads to liberation. You feel me? But rallying behind our fallen brothers and sisters, no matter how much we want to, can sometimes be counterproductive when it comes to pushing against mere representation and leading us to actually fixing some of the issues or forcing them, because they ain't gonna never fix it because they want to fix it. You know that, right? You know that, right? Too much power. We have to force their hands. And in order to do so, we got to take direct action. Now, for all the young people watching, I ain't trying to radicalize you or nothing like that. I'm just trying to be very honest about this is how it goes. Yeah. We have the history, we know it already. We just don't do it no more.
Thank you, Zoe, for that challenging, thoughtful question. All right, up next we have Tinu, one of our 8th graders from Granger Middle School. Tinu, you want to go ahead and ask your question to Jason and Sonia?
My question is, do you think racism can ever be gone or cured?
Gosh, man, I feel like we stepped into a gauntlet. I feel like I feel like before we got here, Sonia, they were like, before we got here, Sonia said, listen, make sure you come up with the hardest questions you can think of.
Yeah. These are so hard. These are hard questions. These are questions I ask myself all the time.
Yeah.
I don't know if I have a certainty around it, but I do know what we can do is really think about our practices, think about our policies, think about our actions, and be on the lookout for ways that racism, you know, is embedded in that. And as Dr. Ibram Kendi says, to admit it. And we don't like to admit as our, in this society, this is a society that doesn't like to bear their wounds. So I do think that there is hope if we are willing to, each one of us, admit to the biases, to the ways in which we've all been socialized into racism, all of us, and to actively look for it and root it out, and to disrupt it.
Yeah, Tino, this is a tough one.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Dr. Kendi would say yes. He says yes all the time. He believes that we can live in an anti-racist world.
Mm-hmm.
He and I differ on this opinion. I struggle with this, Tino. I'm gonna be honest with you. I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful for certain things. I struggle, not because I don't want it, but because I don't know if it makes sense that we would live in a world that is not racist. I just think we could build a world where racism is less effective.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So like, we spend a lot of time trying to change people's minds and hearts. And I'm like, you have a right to hate me. You just don't have a right to stop me. So I'm trying to figure out how to change these laws so you can't stop me. And if you try, that you are punished in the way that anybody else would be punished, right? But I'm careful about, Tinu, I'm careful about like kumbaya.
Mm-hmm.
Because at the end of the day, we still human beings, right? Like, you don't like everybody, Tinu, and some of the people you don't like for no good reason. That's a fact. You know it, I know it, we all know it, right? We all hate us to some regard, right? We all, it's in all of us. And so I don't know if it's like I'm supposed to change the hearts and minds of every single person in every single context, or if I'm supposed to make sure that the poison that exists in all of us is less effective when it comes to damaging other people. Mm-hmm. To me, I'd rather put my energy there. It makes more sense. Instead of me trying to build this sort of fantasy land, a utopia, it's like, let me just build a fair land. Let's build something fair. It ain't gotta be fantasy, but fair, we can do that. You feel me? Hopefully the next question is, what's your favorite food? You feel me?
these are the questions we have. These are the questions that we're fielding in the classroom, or we're having these conversations around what's happening in the world. So I appreciate both of you modeling how to respond to that. As teachers, it's been tough.
Yeah.
Hey, I want to say this real quick, Tinu. I'm so proud of you. I'm so proud of y'all, right? I was doing an interview earlier today, and they was like, we just don't know why you would ever talk to the young people about it. I'm like, you have no idea what they talk about and how they think about the world,
mm-hmm.
right? And so I'm just always so proud to know that y'all are even thinking about these things in ways that I was not when I was your age. You know?
Yeah. I know personally, Tinu has a lot of thoughts on that. I'm lucky to have her in social and U.S. history class this year. So
that's what the teachers say when the student be giving them the blues. I know that. I know that.
She blows me away. She's teaching me. Up next, we have our third and final student panelist. And I want to invite Sai, who is one of our Neuqua Valley High School students, on to ask our final student panel question.
Good evening, Mr. Reynolds and Dr. Paul. In your piece of literature, Stamped, you and Dr. Kendi inspired hope for an anti-racist future and ceased to abolish the effectiveness of racism that once wreaked havoc in our societies. How must we implement these solutions within today's conflicts of racial injustice and these divisions that are separating everyone apart?
Yeah, man. Well, it didn't get any easier, Sonia.
It did not. You go first.
Okay. You know what? What's your name, brother? I want to make sure I pronounce your name right. I want to call you by your name.
I'm Sai.
Sai?
My name is Sai. Yeah.
You know, man, Sai, I actually think y'all already had the answer to this question. You see, the interesting thing about Generation Z is that you all are actually the most empathetic generation to ever live. Y'all care about this more than anybody before you, right? We have never lived in a time where you all are doing the best you can at pushing the adults to like forcing us to bear witness to the many identities one human being can hold, to the diversity of a community, of a classroom, of an individual. It has never been we have never experienced this, and it's making all of us uncomfortable. Which how you know, that's how you know you're doing it, you're good at it, right? You know you're doing it right when the adults in your lives are getting a little uncomfortable and we all annoyed about it, right? That's because you all are pushing it in a way that is challenging the status quo. It's challenging what we're all used to, right? So the first thing I want to say is, you probably know better than I do as to how what this looks like on you know, as you get older and as you sort of get in the world. The other thing though is, I think ultimately, for me, one of the things that we have to remember is that, like, when we talk about anti-racism, we're speaking about it in this particular context in terms of like race, but the truth of the matter is, in terms of the color of skin. But the truth of the matter is the definition of race has nothing to do with the color of skin, right? It's contextualized that way in America, but the actual definition is just a body of people, right? A grouping of people, right? Which is the reason that you can't necessarily live an anti-racist life or act as an anti-racist person if you are homophobic, or if you are sexist or ageist or ableist, if you are Islamophobic, if you are anti-margin in any way, then technically you are not living. I don't want to say you cannot be, because I think even that's a weird thing, but you are not sort of functioning in an anti-racist space. So your question really is about, how can I make sure as I move around the world and as I engage with people that I'm seeing them as people first, that I'm seeing, we ain't even, it's so weird. What a big hoax, right? We've all been tricked. Right? We've all been tricked, right? I'm talking to you, me and you can have a conversation all night and agree on more things than we disagree on.
Right.
But we won't communicate, right? And the reason we won't communicate because it hurts to listen. Because in order to listen, you're gonna have to hear something that you might not agree with, and then you still gonna have to see the person that's saying that to you as a human being. What does it mean to see my brother as my brother, even if I don't know him?
Something greater.
Right? That's a complicated thing, but this is what we're talking about. And if we could do that, if that's a very small thing, if we could do that side, we could say, how can I make sure that I'm making space for the women in my life? That their voices are heard, that they feel safe. Oof. We moving forward. How can I make sure that my peoples who practice whatever religions they practice, that I'm making sure that they have a safe space to do so because they belong here and they deserve it? Simple stuff, right? This is everyday stuff. It ain't always got to be a big thing, homie.
Yeah.
Right? This is you telling your white friends to stop saying the N-word.
Yeah.
Right? That's big. Simple stuff.
Yeah.
I would say, I would also just say, Sai, that, you know, oftentimes it's said that talking about race and racism is too divisive and therefore we should not do it, which is part of your question. And I think that the big thing we need to do is figure out how can we, all of us, be in community with one another, even when there's tension. Mm-hmm. And for me, I think that means we have to be willing to lose some things. We have to be willing to grieve in order to gain. We're going to have to be willing to lose our comfort. Sometimes we might lose some friends and some family in terms of the relationship that you once had with them. It might be different. And we have to humble ourselves to admit that, you know, we don't know what we don't know. Yeah. And we need to be willing to learn and to unlearn and to relearn. And when we do that, we're going to gain so much more. We're going to gain, you know, close relationships with one another, people who are in the work together, who really want to bring about an anti-racist future. You're going to gain close relationships with people maybe you've never had relationships with before, from different racial and cultural backgrounds. And we're going to gain a greater sense of our humanity.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sai. I want to thank all of our young people who joined us tonight on the student panel, Zoe and Tinu and Sai. Your incredible questions sparked a lot of audience questions in our Q&A. And so before we move on to our teacher panel questions, I'm going to invite Saili back on to pose one of the audience Q&As before we move on.
Thank you, Jessica, and thank you to all the students that came today. This question actually, I think, is important after the students just asked their question, and it's written by a teacher in our district. Some of my African-American students tell me in private that they are tired of reading and discussing the oppression of African-Americans and their struggles for freedom and equality. One asked to leave the class because the topics made her emotional. I fully acknowledge to them that I am a white woman from privilege. I acknowledge that the conversations will be uncomfortable, but the conversations are what can move us forward. I love my students. I want them to feel valued and loved. There are very few African-American students in my class, and I don't want them to feel targeted, even though I'm implementing uncomfortable conversations. But I don't know how to do that. We have talked about how to be anti-racist and white privilege. I'm looking for advice on how to navigate these important issues.
So I answer questions like these all the time with educators, and I think it goes back to something I was saying earlier. If the only time you are talking about Black and brown people is through the lens of oppression and victimization, then yeah, your Black and brown students are going to want to slink out of their chairs and go underneath the table. If the only time you are referencing Blackness is through the lens of slavery and civil rights, then yeah. But if you are the teacher who is helping all of your students, not just in February, learn about, Dr. James West and just all these incredible Black people and the work that they've done and helping all kids know their names and their work. Affirmation, right? We need to be affirming racial and cultural identities before you can start to get to the awareness. What is the work you're doing to affirm Black people? And echoed across the research in particular is that Black children need two things to succeed at higher rates. And one is to develop a strong racial and cultural identity. How will that happen if the only time you reference anyone that looks like them is through oppression and victimization? So that's what I would say. It's like, where are you starting from? Are you starting from the richness of Black identities? Are you starting from a place of affirming Black people? And the second thing I would say is, really think about establishing, community agreements in the classroom, in the school, for having conversations about race and racism. Because we've made it a legacy in this country of not doing that well. And so therefore we don't know how to do that. So having some sort of community agreements, you can co-construct them, you can find them on various resources. Courageous Conversations by Dr. Glenn Singleton, or Learning for Justice is another great website to go to. But constructing community agreements is one way to have more productive conversations.
I defer.
Thank you.
That's the answer.
Thank you. Jason, did you want to add, or you're okay? Great.
This
Thank
is
you.
literally what Dr. Sonia Cherry Paul does. I have nothing to add.
Yeah. Absolutely, absolutely. So I think we're still curating questions, but I wanted to make sure that our teachers also get a chance to ask their questions. So I'd like to welcome Jen Rowe, who is our district's Director of Educational Equity, to introduce her teacher panel. Welcome, Jen.
Thank you, Ms. Joshi. Hi, Dr. Cherry Paul and Jason Reynolds. Thank you for being with us this evening. So thrilled for some of our amazing educators to get to ask questions to you this evening. And first up, we have Casey Solgos, who's one of our English teachers at Mattia Valley High School. Thank you so much for being with us, Mr. Solgos.
Well, thank you, and thanks for the privilege of being able to ask a question. Mr. Reynolds, I'd like to direct this towards you. I had the privilege of teaching a couple of your books in my African American literature class. And well, you could tell us what your favorite food is when you're answering your question too. But I have to ask the English teacher question. It's about your sort of authorial intentions. I imagine that you and Dr. Kendi had some really difficult conversations about what content made it into your adaptation, what stuff you had to leave out to keep it manageable. So one, I was hoping you could talk about how much autonomy you had in creating your adaptation of the book. And then secondly, if there was a revised and expanded second edition, what's one thing that you would hope would make the cut into that new edition?
Easy, man. My favorite food is any kind of fish with a head and a tail. I like the whole fish, head and tail. If my fish don't got no head on it, I can't eat it. Got to have the whole fish. I think the brain matter to make it taste better. In my mind, that's what you know what I mean? And as far as Kendi's and my autonomy, I was basically, he left me alone. He gave me a beat sheet. He basically said, listen, here's a list of things you can't not put in the book, right? Here's 10 things that have to be in the book in order for the point to be made, right? So it's like, you can't leave out, Gomez Azurara. You can't leave out, like very, broad sort of things that I had to make sure I put in. And then I ain't hear from him no more. That was it. He literally was like, all right, now do your thing and let me know when it's over, when you're done. And 2 years later, I turned it in and was like, yeah, this is what I got. And he was like, cool. And that was the end of the story. That's the end of the story. I wish there was more to tell you, but I mean, I know him as a person. That's my homie, is all good. But he really was like, I trust you. So I'm not going to be hanging over you or hovering over you for you to do this. Like, do what you do. And I'm going to go ahead and go about my business. If I could do it again, if there's, what would I put in the book that is not in the book? Tulsa. It breaks my heart. And I'm gonna be honest with you, it was an oversight. I literally, look, there's a lot of information in that book. And it's like, I'm trying to figure out, and I wasn't even a good student, right? So like for me, like researching is hard, studying is hard, taking notes. I was not that kid, right? So for all of y'all out there who are like me, just know it ain't the end of the road. You'll be all right. You know what I mean? But I struggled in school when it came to this kind of thing, right? And so for me to try to figure out how to synthesize all that information, there were moments where and then I look back and I'm like, of course I would miss this really important thing. Tulsa is the one thing, if I could do it all again, if I got one more crack at it, I would write Tulsa.
Yeah. And the centennial is this year, so in a few weeks. So yeah. Students, if you don't know about Tulsa, please pick up a book. I want to give you a recommendation. It is a picture book. Yes, I know you're those of you who are middle school students are probably thinking, you might be thinking it's not for you, but it is a picture book that that can be read as a middle school student. I promise you, you're going to love it. It's called Unspeakable by Carol Boston Weatherford, illustrated by Floyd Cooper. There's just so much in there. So please learn about Tulsa. Yeah.
Thank you for that. And we talk a lot about using children's books in our work at all grade levels. Ms. Walsh is our queen of back matter and picking the best children's books to use in our teaching practices. Thanks, Casey. Next up, we have one of our graduates from our district who is an elementary teacher, Ms. Tyler Hunt. We're so proud of her and all that she's accomplishing in her young career. So thanks for being here, Ms. Hunt.
Thank you. That was so nice. My young career. All right. Well, my question today is directed towards Dr. Cherry Paul. I had the pleasure of reading your adaptation for kids. I think it was like 6 to 10. It was awesome. So thank you for that. And my question is, what would you say to elementary teachers like myself, or I guess unlike me, because I read the book, who feel that the topics of racism and anti-racism are too much for young students to understand, or let alone even discuss? What would you say to those?
Yeah. So I would say that, young children are able to understand complex ideas. And, I get this a lot in the primary grades where there are elementary school teachers who think the kids are too young. They are really steeply into a color blindness approach, if you will. And they believe that their kids are racial innocents. And so I tell them kind of what I said in Stamped. Number one, that's ridiculous. Of course, children see color. Secondly, it's racist, right? Because you're pretending not to see Black and brown people. But it's important that to my knowledge, there's no research that supports this idea that kids are too young. In fact, kids are coming into schools before 5 already having some racist ideas. They recognize race as infants, and they are swimming in the same racist waters as the rest of us. So they're coming into schools already understanding something about this racial hierarchy. And when we silence race, then young children are forced to put the pieces together on their own, and kids are going to do that. And that leads to a lot of racist ideas. There's an educational researcher, and her name is Dr. Lee, I believe it's Wilton. And she says this thing that I love. She says that toddlers can't do calculus, but that doesn't stop us from teaching them how to count. So what we're looking to do is have meaningful conversations with kids at their level about race and racism. And there's a lot of really great books coming through for early childhood to help kids really start to think about race. I want to just shout out too, there's a book called Our Skin. I think it's by Megan Madison, and it's a board book, literally teaching kids about melanin. So I say to teachers, if your kids can say Tyrannosaurus Rex, they can say melanin, right? Teaching them about melanin. Imagine how we would all show up if we just knew at 4 and 5 years old that we look the way we look because of melanin. And in this book, it teaches them about race and how that came to be. And so, that's what I would say to teachers, that they're not too young, that this is really about your discomfort. And what we need is for educators to be more comfortable being uncomfortable, right? That should be your goal. Just get more comfortable being uncomfortable doing this work. And the more that you do it and the more conversations you have, the more comfortable you will all become.
It's such a weird thing, isn't it? Like,
yeah,
because kids play video games. So I'm always like, so your baby can understand violence,
right,
without context.
Yep.
Which is far more harmful
than
us trying to create a contextualized avenue to understand race. Right? It's so weird. Like,
yeah, yeah. And then a lot of it too is not an unwillingness to talk about whiteness.
Right.
You see, there's a lot of teachers who want to talk about race and they'll talk about Blackness, but they don't want to talk about whiteness. And you are not teaching about race and racism if you are unwilling to talk about whiteness and white supremacy. It's not happening because of this invisible force. And so that becomes another place of discomfort for teachers. And so what we need is all educators to acquire racial literacy, to really understand that you can be white and not subscribe to whiteness. And we need to be able to understand the difference.
I agree. Thank you, guys.
Let us know when your career becomes an old career, all right?
Thank you for that. We were getting some messages from our amazing library team, and they were letting us know that you can pick up a copy of Unspeakable at the Naperville Public Library. So next we have Miss Kibby Lewis. She's one of our middle school assistant principals over at Crone, and so thankful to have her here this evening.
My question is for Jason Reynolds. Most of the books that you've written are fiction. And in fact, our 7th grade teachers are reading Ghosts with their students right now. So I've popped into a couple classrooms and heard them discussing that. So now that you've worked with Stamped and written Stamped Remix, is this altering your writing path? Are you going to move more into nonfiction? Do you have any nonfiction works, any books going on right now?
No. You know what? It's been a wonderful experience to know that I can. This was the greatest challenge of my life. This was a very hard thing to do. Very hard. If it's easy to read, it's because it was difficult to write. Right? And so I have no desire at the time, anytime soon, to do anything else. Now I like to play around too much. I'm like a 16-year-old, you know what I mean? I'm trying to make up stuff and tell a bunch of lies and like imagine things. It was too which is the reason why Stamp reads that way, right? Why it's all it's a little looser, because I'm not that guy. So if I did write nonfiction, the tone of it would definitely be it would be light, just because that's just the way I like to write. You know what a dream job would be, to be honest with you, is if like McGraw-Hill called me and was like, hey, we want you to rewrite all the textbooks, I would do that. I would do that. I would do that in a heart. I would like, let's flip it all upside down. Let's make it engaging, right? Let's lock it.
I was gonna say engaging.
Right, you know what I mean? That I would do. But other than that, I'm cool. I'm gonna go back to my stories.
Thank you.
Thank you, teachers, so much for your contributions. And Jason, I have to say, having a son, it's been a real joy getting to read some of your books with him. I always like to say my son and I, we have our Mother and Son Woke Book Club, and it's been a great journey to just select books, and some of your books have been ones that we've been able to read and discuss together. So thank you for your gifts of story.
I appreciate that.
Thank you, Jen. I think we just have a couple of minutes left, but I wanted to ask this one question because I think it's a great way to close out the evening. It's also has been asked by a teacher who is one of our equity champions in our district. In the interest of making sure our classrooms are showcasing positive and joyful representations of all identities, what are some names, books, films, figures that you would point to us that are at the top of your gotta see, read, know this list as a reader or a teacher?
Okay. Grade levels, just any grade level?
Any grade levels. This is from a high school teacher, but any grade levels. And I welcome you to send these to us as well. We would be happy to continue to share these throughout the year to our community.
Well, obviously, Jason Reynolds, anything. I would also say Renee Watson, anything. I would say Joel Parker Rhodes, anything.
You're killing it so far. You're killing it.
Right? I mean, you know, I mean, I literally have a stack of teachers like to ask me this every day. Like, what's in Dr. Cherry Paul's stack? I've got a stack of beautiful picture books. Eyes That Kiss in the Corner by Joanna Ho. Jacqueline Woodson, anything.
Oh, gee, yeah.
Right? Derek Barnes.
Yeah.
Derek Barnes, anything. I Am Every Good Thing and Crown, Ode to the Fresh Cut. These are beautiful, beautiful picture books that are like, again, just affirming of racial and cultural identities. Beautiful, beautiful books.
I would say everybody she said, but also I would add Case and Calendar.
Oh, yes.
Anything by Case and Calendar. Anything by Cynthia Karuhata. Kira Kira is a masterpiece. Cynthia Karuhata. It's a brilliant book.
Did you read Deep Flower?
Oh my God.
Yeah.
So good. We got the same editor. I'm like, yeah.
Yeah.
Crazy. Check out Evie's a Boy stuff. Check out for my high schoolers who are a little 11, 12, check out Jasmine Ward.
Yep.
I mean, there's so many. I mean, Tahira Mafi, her contemporary stuff especially is brilliant. Also, y'all, read fantasy in school. That's another thing. Read, teachers, please. Why are we not using fantasy? Like, please, the whole book is a metaphor. I don't know why we're not using it, right? Like, use fantasy in school. There are a lot of really brilliant writers who write fantasy who get excluded from curriculums because for some reason we put them in this weird genre category as if all of us don't have genres. It's a weird thing. Teach fantasy, and there's a whole, Danielle Clayton, it's a whole lot of them who write this brilliant work about people of color and all marginalized groups, but it's fantasy, which is even better to me. It's like, so check that out too. And before we close, I know you can wrap it up. I want to say this because I'd like to make it a point to make sure you give people their flowers. Listen, when y'all talk about Stand for Kids, y'all better say Dr. Sonia Cherry Paul name. Stop tagging me. Stop saying it's my book. Stop, like, it ain't my book, right? Say a name when y'all tag that book, when you talk about it with your friends, when you talk about it on the internet, when you talk about it in your class, say her name to make sure that she gets the credit she deserves. And done.
Well, thank you, Jason. It was just such an honor to shepherd this next iteration into the world. I'm so grateful that you trusted me with that work. It was just honestly an amazing experience. So thank you for that.
We appreciate you.
Thank you.
And on behalf of all of us here tonight and our school district and our community, I would like to thank both of you for spending this evening with us. We have truly enjoyed not only reading your books, but the conversations that we are all having. And I'm hoping this summer we can have some in-person outdoor conversations, and then certainly next year in the classrooms at now a new level at elementary schools, start having these conversations with a younger group of children. I just wanted to leave tonight with a quote that is very important to me. I come from a Gandhian family in India. And one of my favorite quotes is that you may never know what results come from your actions, but if you do nothing, there will be no result. So as we go into the summer, to particularly all the students that are listening tonight, think about your passions. Look for where you can make a difference and go out into this world with conviction. Spend your summer reading, spend your summer relaxing. You deserve it after this year, but also conversing with your neighbors, with your friends, with people of a different generation, people who may look different than you, that may practice different faiths, so that you can continue to grow as a human being, as a young adult. And that goes for us as parents as well. We want our children to grow and learn new things, but we have to also bear that responsibility for ourselves. So to everyone here tonight, be safe, be healthy, enjoy the summer, and we hope that you will join us next year at PDAC for another wonderful year of discussing and talking about courageous conversations. Thank you for attending today. And I would like to ask that the authors, as well as all the panelists, stay on for a few minutes. We'd like to take one Zoom picture since we're not in person. And then we have a couple of our student press representatives that will have one or two questions as well. But thank you to all the attendees for coming tonight.
Well, you guys, that was amazing. Let's see, do we want to take a quick picture? And I know we have two of our youth media representatives here, if they could ask you all a question before they go for the student paper.
Do we want to take the photo first? So any of our other panelists who need to go can jump off real quick?
Okay.
Okay, so if everyone can turn their cameras on real quick. Are we doing a screenshot, Jen?
Mm-hmm.
Am I doing it?
I can do one too.
All right, you do it, you do it.
Okay, are we ready? Okay, everyone smile. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Okay, I'll do one more just to make sure. Oh my goodness. Okay, ready? Ready? Oh, I love it. They've got some books up there. 1, 2, 3. Okay, thank you. All right, who do we have up for our questions? I know we had Arthi and Lauren. Lauren, are you representing the school paper and the NAACP today?
The NAACP and the broadcast journalism program.
All right, so we can start with you, and then Arthi is representing Neuqua Valley Media. All right, Lauren, you want to ask your question?
Yes. So, Mr. Reynolds, in an interview on The Daily Show with Trevor Noah, you talked about educators being reluctant to read about societal issues like in Stamped because they see it as indoctrination. Why do you believe some fear or sensitive when it comes to talking about topics addressed in Stamped in the name of indoctrination? And what do these fears speak volumes to?
You know what I think it is, Lauren. First of all, thank you for your question, but really what I think it is that people use language, people weaponize language in funny ways. Everything, all of us have been indoctrinated by something, by our mothers, right? Our parents, our teachers. It's literally what our teachers do every day, right? It's like all of us have, the real question is, what exactly is the doctrine? That's the question. Indoctrination isn't a problem. The doctrine that's being used is where things get complicated. And so for me, indoctrination is teaching in general is a form of indoctrination, right? If we're doing it right, we're also teaching you how to think, not what to think, but how to think as well. But at the end of the day, we're also teaching you the systems to use to exercise that function, right? It's still a form of indoctrination. All I'm saying is, if we could use Stamped and Stamped for Kids as a new doctrine, then that means that we could possibly indoctrinate a new generation into where equity is just the way y'all walk. I don't know why that's a bad thing. You feel me? So that's my whole thing about that. It's just adults being silly as usual. You know what I mean?
Thank you. Lauren, did you get everything you needed? Did you?
I had a next question, and then so I think it was answered throughout the Zoom today, but I'll ask it again. How do both of you propose we talk about equity, racism, and social justice in the classroom? And is there a right way to do this and a wrong way to do this, or is it just open to how they can get that message out?
Mm-hmm. You really are a journalist. They're like, is that it? You're like, there's more questions.
I don't think there's any one right way to do it. I think that, again, I think starting with community agreements is a very smart thing for educators to do, so that there are some expectations in place in the classroom. I think kids need to develop racial literacy, which means we need teachers to as well. We need to make sure that racism is not positioned as a past condition, but a contemporary one, a right now thriving problem, right? We need to develop an understanding of, Jason was talking tonight about intersectionality, the way other social identities are influenced with, the way race is influenced by other social identities like gender and class, sexuality, language, immigration status, right? To create new and nuanced ways that people can experience oppression. We need to acquire an understanding of whiteness, the way in which The standards and norms of our society are driven by white people who overwhelmingly control, power and resources. I can go on, but there's a way in which teaching about race and racism in schools, it's like this narrative. There was slavery, then Lincoln freed the slaves. There was segregation, and then, Dr. King had a dream. And then we had Obama. And so we're good. And so what we really need is, Jason was talking about teaching indoctrination, you were asking, Lauren. We don't just teach curriculum as educators, we do teach ways of thinking. Mm-hmm. And so let's all just be clear that that's what we're doing every day. And one way of thinking is to help kids really develop their socio-political consciousness and their critical consciousness to really understand the ways race and racism impacts every part of our lives.
Yeah. I'm always waiting for a teacher to come into the classroom and say, we're going to learn this together.
Yeah.
Because they don't be knowing, Lauren. They don't be knowing.
They don't.
They don't.
They don't.
And they should just say that. And then you break down the pedagogy. You change the pedagogy on the spot.
Yep.
And it becomes a reciprocal pedagogy. It literally becomes you teach me, I teach you, we do this thing together.
Yeah.
Be amazing.
Yep.
Jason just outed all of us.
Yeah, they don't be knowing.
We don't know.
They don't know how to use commas, and they don't know nothing about this race. Yeah.
That was my last question too.
That was your last one. Okay, I think Jen is frozen, so I'm gonna say, is it Art? Yeah, Arti, go ahead.
Yeah. First of all, thank you so much for this opportunity to ask both of you questions. I really loved both of your books and your work. I'm definitely gonna have to check out the rest of it. But you kind of touched on this today. But you kind of talked about how Gen Z is seen as like this empathetic generation. And both of you are trying to bring conversations about race into our lives and into the classroom. But it's so hard because we're so small, and it's like we don't have that much power. So the younger generation, the media has defined us as a proponent for change, but it seems difficult for us to do anything that isn't performative. We can post something on Instagram with an infographic someone has made or share links, but that's not what you defined as direct action. So how can we as teenagers actively support our community and combat racism in a way that isn't just performative?
So this is, first of all, thank you so much for this question. Second of all, you're not small. We're gonna clear that up, right? You're not small. I'm gonna tell you a quick story. I was in Brooklyn. I was doing a talk at a school in Brooklyn. I show up as usual to give this talk. At the time, I was promoting a book about police brutality. Show up to the school, can't get in the front door. Young lady comes to the front door. She's in the 10th grade. She cracks the door. It's the middle of the school day. She cracks the door. Hey, I say, hey, how you doing? My name is Jason Reynolds. She said, we know who you are. We know what you're here for, but you can't come in here because we're staging a protest and we've locked everybody outside. All of our teachers are on the outside of the building because at this school, they all went outside for lunch. All the teachers would go to lunch every day outside the school. They have been planning this for months, right? There was all kind of racial stuff going on in the school that nobody would address. The teachers wouldn't address. So they found 2 or 3 teachers who were allies, who could work on the side of the teachers. And these teenagers locked the entire staff, including the principal, out of the school. And so they let me in after I agreed to the terms, and I had to stand with them and for hours until the principal said, okay, I'm ready to listen to what you have to say. And not only were they organized and did they have everything that they needed and wanted on this level, which was their school, which is what they were trying to change in this moment, they also gave the principal 2 weeks to get it done. Told him, hey, look, you got 2 weeks or there's gonna be more of this. So I wanna make sure you know that when I'm talking about direct action, there's no age limit on that. It's just about whether or not you can organize, be safe, right? And be organized, be safe, find you an adult ally, because I promise you that the adults that are in this space are your allies. Find you an adult ally and you can make it happen. It may not be, and it could be in a small space, whatever you want to change in your circumference, you can change that with direct action. Also, like, I just don't underestimate y'all power.
Yeah.
March for Our Lives, that's y'all, right? Now we can say it's performative, but we ain't seen nothing like it. The biggest performance we ever seen, right? Black Lives Matter, that's y'all. Conversations around about sexual and gender identity, that's y'all. Y'all leading that. All of this is y'all. You know what I mean? So I think I don't want you to discredit the performance, because I think that what you all are showing us is the biggest performance we've ever seen. And I think that matters. But I also don't want you to believe that you still don't have the power to have to enact direct action, because I've seen it with my own eyes multiple times in very real ways. And they got it done. I was at a school in Massachusetts, and all the girls, it was an all-boys school and an all-girls school. And the girls would have to go to the boys' school for classes sometimes. And the girls were mad because there were no tampons in the bathrooms. So what the girls started doing was coming to school, putting tampons on their desks, behind their ears, using them as head bows, and just sitting there like, y'all gonna have to deal with this. Direct action. And I was like, yo, this is a powerful moment. And guess what happened? Tampons everywhere. That's an amazing thing, right? Don't sleep on yourself.
Yeah. And I do think part of the genius of Stamped and what Jason has done is that kids are learning things that they haven't learned, and they're showing up differently in their classrooms. And I had some kid readers read an early draft of Stamped for Kids. A fourth grader was one of them. And before the book came out, she had read a draft and, gave me some feedback. But one of her teachers gave her a early history of the Southwest handout. You remember those handouts you get as like a third grader or fourth grader. And one of the questions was, I'm reading it here, why did the Spanish want to teach the Native Americans about Christianity? And 9-year-old Dahlia responded. She said they wanted the Native Americans to be like them, which means they wanted power. And in all caps, she wrote, "This is assimilationist thinking." She's 9. And I think, kids are going to be reading, these books, and they're going to be showing up differently. And they will not be waiting for their teachers to be comfortable having these conversations anymore. They're going to just be putting it there and really forcing teachers to get comfortable.
Yeah. And Artie, is it Artie?
Arthi.
Artie. I should have known that because I got a homegirl named Preeti and it's spelled T-I. Yeah. Also, I just want to make sure also, it's okay to be scared. Because that's the other thing, right? You hear us talking, and I ain't telling you go be no revolutionary. You already are that.
Mm-hmm.
You already are that, right? It's okay to be afraid. It's okay to be uncertain. It's okay to be unsure. Just know that there's still power there. That's all I'm saying. There's still power there. Dr. King was scared every day of his life. He was scared and he moved anyway,
Thank you so much, both of you. That was really helpful. I don't have any other questions.
Thank you, Arthi. This is really powerful. Thank you all for taking extra time to stay with our young people this evening. It really means a lot. Those responses were extremely powerful. Whew. So I think that's all we have. Thank you so much. Young people, you are amazing. We're so proud of you and our teachers too. Tyler Hunt.
For sure.
Thank you, Dr. Cherry Paul. We appreciate you, Jason Reynolds. Thank you for being here. We love watching you on Antiques Roadshow the other night too.
Word up, you know what I mean? Hey man, get you somebody who could do both. You know what I'm saying? You gotta do everything. All right, y'all. Peace.
And you are always welcome back. Thank you so much. We really enjoyed the interaction and the conversation. Thank you all for coming.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.
Have a good night, y'all.
See you.
Mm-hmm. That was amazing.
Oh my gosh. Way to go, students. Way to go, everyone.
Wow, what a way to end the year.
You want me to stop recording, Siley, just real quick?
Yeah, thank you, Jessica.